Time is precious, and so are our pets. So time with our pets is extra precious. That's why we started Dutch. Dutch provides 24/7 access to licensed vets, with unlimited virtual visits and follow-ups for up to 5 pets. You can message a vet at any time and schedule a video visit the same day. Our vets can even prescribe medication for many ailments, and shipping is always free. With Dutch, you'll get more time with your pets and year-round peace of mind when it comes to their vet care.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govind Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govind Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 238, and I'm so glad you're here. If you've ever faced a challenge that shook you, if you've ever wondered what it truly means to live a life well lived, not just achieved, but deeply felt, then what you're about to hear may be exactly what you didn't even realize you needed. Because what if your hardest moments weren't setbacks, but stepping stones? Today, I'm joined by someone who turned deep adversity into deeper wisdom. Jim Kaveney is the founder of Unlimited Heart, and his work is all about helping people and leaders find their way back to themselves. Through his journey, Jim has come to believe something powerful, that within every challenge lies a teacher, and within every heart is the potential to live unlimited. What happens if we stop running from pain and start listening to it? What happens if remembering your mortality isn't morbid, but actually the key to unlocking your most vibrant days? And what could change for you if you stopped trying to earn your worth and just started living it? In this conversation, Jim shares a truth that might surprise you, inspire you, or even challenge you. And I hope it does all three. So grab a napkin, take a deep breath, and get ready to see your challenges and yourself in a new light. Let's dive in. Jim Kaveney, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to be sitting with you here today.
Excited to be with you, Govind. Thank you for the time.
Yeah. Well, you shared a really great napkin, and it says, challenges are teachers. Your greatest challenges are your greatest teachers. Transform your pain into purpose, seize the day, and embrace the truth of your mortality. An unlimited heart fuels a life well lived. And you've underlined well lived. Why did you share that with me?
Well, I shared it with you because it's fundamentally what I obviously believe in. It's what I have experienced in the last, let's call it 50 years of my 51 years, almost 51 years of life in existence. And it's something in which, I think as I grew up going through some challenges in life with anxiety, I never knew exactly what some of those challenges were, why I was going through what I was going through. And they didn't really teach me anything until I was probably 38 and diagnosed with my diagnosis of atrial fibrillation. And when I realized, as I looked in rears, I was like, holy cow, those challenges is what prepared me to be ready for this. And so the lessons were learned as I was getting ready to take on my next challenge.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting, right? You talked about how 51 years of experience prepared you for, let's say, a bigger, more acute challenge that occurred at your 38th. So let's, but were you aware prior to your health scare at 38 that you were learning from these challenges, or did that become apparent later?
No, it absolutely became apparent later. And I think, I love to steal Steve Jobs' quote, right? When he gave his commencement speech, he had said, we don't really connect the dots moving forward. We only connect the dots when we look in rears. And so it wasn't until I honestly sat down, wrote my book, and started putting the pieces and parts together and thought to myself, holy cow, like everything that I went through, those dots, and in between those dots, obviously, is the messiness of life. That's when I looked at this, I said, holy cow, all of that stuff prepared me, made me a stronger man to get through those challenges. And I don't know, hopefully I don't have any other challenges in my life at this point, but I'm sure something else will come around. But that's really when I recognized like all of that was for preparation. And success comes when people are prepared. And I guess maybe I didn't know what I was doing and how I was responding or reacting to those instances, but it definitely must have made me stronger.
Yeah. And so 38 years old is young to have anything wrong with your heart. That must have been pretty scary. And atrial fibrillation is a big deal. What happened?
Yeah, so for me, right, it goes back to actually even before I was 38. I had some instances when I was in college. I was a college rower, so I was on the rowing team for 4 years. Aggressive training. When we found now they found that individuals that are in extreme sports, extreme elevated, high intensity training, actually are starting to show that younger people are having a larger propensity of AFib now. It's because they're actually transforming their hearts into that. The heart wants, it's a muscle, right? So it wants to continue to perform at that level. But we know physically we can't survive if it always wants to do that. And so when I had those instances in college, I ignored them, rightfully so. I was 20, 21. I was like, what's wrong with me? And I joked at the time. I said, maybe I had a beer or two before the night before practice. And so maybe I was dehydrated. But so ultimately, I stepped out of rowing and then my AFib went away. I didn't know I was in AFib. I knew nothing of that when I was younger. I just, whatever. But then it wasn't until I was 38 and fully diagnosed with it. That's when my cardiologist said, explain to me what your whole history was. And I told him I was, a rower in college. And that's when he defined me, by the way. He defined me as an elite athlete. I never not self-defined by any means. But he's like, you're an elite athlete, and we're seeing a higher propensity of that. And I'm like, oh, that's crazy, right? So that started to make me understand why at the age of 38 I had this. And also at the age of 38, I was starting my first business. So, I'm thinking my AFib probably was riding underneath the surface a little bit. And then in comes the stress of launching a brand new business and everything else. And then it was the diagnosis reared its ugly head.
So let's talk about navigating those two challenges. I mean, I know something about running a business and starting a business. That's a full-time job. That's more than a
Yeah.
full-time job. That takes up a lot of heart space and a lot of head space. And you had something going on.
Yeah.
How did you juggle the two?
Yeah. So that's, in my book, I talk about the concepts of tying in, when my heart was weak, my mind was strong. And when my mind was weak, my heart was strong. And when we can get the two of those together, that's when I talk about the unlimited nature of a well-lived life, right? Because if you can
Mm.
align those two things, then there's nothing that you can't accomplish. And so I found myself saying a couple of things. Like I knew my heart was weak, so I knew my mind needed to be exceptionally strong, right? I needed to persist enough because for me, failure was not going to overtake me as long as my determination was strong. And that's where I was at. And in my purpose for what I was doing was great. I thought at the time, but my larger purpose was taking care of my wife and my two little boys. I mean, we had just moved to New Hampshire. My wife left her full-time job to ultimately raise the kids because a lot of our money was going to daycare. So we're like, all right, let's do this differently. And then I surprised her with like, hey, I'm leaving my job and I'm going to start a business, right? So she's like, great, we have no income and we've got two small boys. What are we going to do, right? And so I said, it'll be fine. And so for me, then it's like with that diagnosis, like, all right, I need to really make this work because I'm not going back into the quote unquote the real world. I was going to be the entrepreneur that I wanted to be. And so we set on that course. And again, when my heart and my mind were both in sync and doing great, that's when the company was really exploding. My family life was exploding, all those things. And then it came crashing back down again when my diagnosis took an ugly turn in 2018. And then I had to come back out of that again on a different side of things.
So, let's talk about how the you and a lot of entrepreneurs do this, right? Where everything seems to be going. There are challenges already, and let's add this other challenge. And what made that the right time for you to jump forward and seize the day? And you seized the day. You transformed your pain into purpose right then. But why did that happen for you then? What do you think the impetus was to start the business then?
Well, for me, even prior to the diagnosis, right? So I was, let's just call, and I love the word that you used earlier, like let's have this podcast so we can be curious about each other. And I was always curious for many, many years. And so for me, and I was in healthcare, life sciences, and I was a national trainer for multiple pharmaceutical and biotech companies. And I kept hearing from people say to me, and they had much more seniority than I did, and they kept saying to me, the way you train classes is so much different than I've ever seen. You should start your own business. And then I kept hearing that for probably about a year or so. And then, but underlying me, I also knew I always wanted to do my own thing. But the strange thing was I wasn't looking at building my business around something that I was great at. I was looking at building something completely different. Like I was a new father, so I was gonna launch a cool hip diaper bag for dads. And then somebody's like, why would you do that? Like you're great at training, build a business around training. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense, right? Let's go with what you know, right? And so
Hmm.
then that's when I said, all right, enough of this. I've got to do it. I'm 38 years old. If I don't do it now, I'm not going to do it ever. And so I'm like, I bit the bullet and jumped into it.
Yeah, there's never a perfect time, and I think that a lot of people talk about you have to fall in love with something, but I almost wonder about whether or not you have to fall in hate with something. You have to fall, you have to really see a problem that you can't look away from and that you want to solve. And part of that is being really good at the solution, really seeing a solution very well. And it sounds like that's how you came into your business,
That's
right?
exactly, yeah, exactly how I did it. And it wasn't, because I'd like to think I'm a modest person. So I knew I was good at my job, but I never walked around with my chest puffed out, like, look at me, I'm the greatest trainer in the world. But it was when these people that I highly respected that had, 10, 15 years on top of my experience, and they're like, no, this is different. This is good. You should do it. And I'm like, all right, maybe there is something here. And so that's what we did.
So taking the challenge that you were facing from a health perspective, being in healthcare, right, and training, were you able to leverage the learnings that you were experiencing going through your own health journey, your acute health journey, in your training later on? Did they complement each other?
They did. They complement each other exceptionally well. So what we did was we built learning materials for pharmaceutical and biotech companies. So if there was a disease state would come across our desk, we would write all the medical journals, modules, everything else for salespeople, medical professionals, everything. So I had access to tons and tons of resources. And so, and I literally was just having this conversation with a nurse practitioner earlier today. And I said to her, I said, the challenge was for me, even though, and I wouldn't say I'm a healthcare provider, but even though I was in the healthcare field, I was still so very ignorant. Like I wasn't taking into consideration what I was reading because I think I had that, as I told her, I had an invincibility complex. Like I can do this myself. Like I can read what they're telling me I should be doing, but I think I know my body. I know what I can do. And I danced with that for a while, and then it almost took me out, right? So that's why nowadays I'm like, listen, don't don't think you're the smartest thing in the room. Even if you know your own body, listen to other people, listen to advice, and do everything possible because you know I probably could have killed myself if I pushed it a little bit too further, a little bit much further.
Yeah, well, and this is the thing that I think is really interesting about your napkin. You say embrace the truth of your mortality, and the first time I read the napkin, and even when I read it to you, because I always find reading the napkin to the person who gives it to me changes the dynamic of the words. But that sent of shivers down my spine. Embracing the truth of your own mortality. That's heavy, man. That's really heavy.
Yeah, it can be, right? It can be, or it could be absolutely freeing as well, right?
Mm.
And I look at it this way, right? So and here's my moment, right? And so it wasn't until 2018 in which again my invincibility complex probably got the best of me. And thank God my cardiologist called me up right before Thanksgiving here in the States and said, hey, I want to put a monitor on you just to see what you're doing. And I said, well, I'm having some symptoms. I think maybe this is just me living with my AFib. And then I come back, I sent the monitor away. I come back and I see this guy. And now we're in December. And, and I'll tell you the whole story because it was really a defining moment for me because I live in southern New Hampshire, and Dartmouth Hospital is an hour and a half north of me. in New Hampshire, northern New Hampshire. And my wife stayed down, didn't come with me to the doctor's appointment. She'd gone to every other appointment. She didn't come with me because my son had a dentist appointment. So we split up. I went my way. I woke up, by the way, had an amazing workout. It was a chest day. So I was all pumped up. I was ready to go. I was going into this my cardiology meeting. I was going to take on the world. And he comes around the corner and he's all ashen. And I don't know if you've ever seen anybody that is like bleach white because they're like, this isn't good. And he's like, Mr. Kaveney, we got to put a pacemaker in you. You have Brady syndrome. And I'm like, what? Like, what is that? Right. And so I knew what it was, but I like, how do I have this? And then he explained it to me. And ultimately what had been happening for me about six months prior to this was my heart was pausing about 30 to 40 times a month for 6 seconds. And so what those 6-second pauses meant was I was at the Brady, by the way, is elevated heart rate. The Brady is your heart's tired, so you're taking a break. So I'd find myself passing out, collapsing while driving, trying to build my business, all these things. Long story short, pacemaker goes in. I think I'm on the better side of it. And then the next week we get together. Now closer to Christmas. I'm sitting on the couch with my kids. We're watching what was deemed as being a Christmas movie, but it was actually Venom by Marvel. And and so my wife leaves the room, and all of a sudden I just feel my heart just start to take off, and I got up to 240 beats per minute. And my pacemaker, I know what my pacemaker was for. My pacemaker was there for the pauses, nothing for the elevation. And so here I think I am. This is it. Like I am racing until I can no longer race, and my heart completely crashes out. Paramedics showed up. My wife's pouring a bottle of aspirin down my throat, chew and swallow, chew and swallow. Like all this is happening, right? So this was my mortality moment. Like I literally think I'm dying at this point. Thankfully, I didn't. Came out of that. And then I said, all right, what do I need to do differently in my life, right? And this is where it was. You don't have to, I guess why I'm saying this is you said it's heavy or it could be freeing. And for me, yes, it was heavy, right? But it was also very freeing because I thought to myself, if I'm not going to be here tomorrow, I'm going to do everything within my power today to make the most of my day, make the most today, most of other people's days if I can, right? And whatever that capacity is. And to me, that's just liberating because then I can just go do what I want to do, not unencumbered. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like if I want to go start another business, I'm going to do it, right? And that's what I'm doing now. Is starting another business because I'm transforming what I went through, my pain, into now what my business is, which is Unlimited Heart Health and Wellness, which is specifically focusing on patients with AFib. And again, going to say, I was smart, but I was so ignorant. I can only imagine individuals that don't have access to the resources that I do, what they're doing, how they're struggling. And that's what we're trying to do is make an impact on their lives.
I think this is really important. I don't want to skip by this. You talked earlier on about the connection between your heart and your head, and that's when the magic happens. You talked about also being well versed in medical journals and medical reading and the research. You know what tachybrady is. You've read you've read the research. You know what AFib is. You know what these things are scientifically. Yet when the Ashton doctor shows up and says, Mr. Kaveney, we're putting in a pacemaker, all that stuff goes away, right? And it just is like, what are you talking about? What does that mean? And isn't that interesting that in those moments, the connection goes away, right? And that's a scary thing. And probably not as scary as a 240 beats per minute. I mean, Venom's an exciting movie, especially when watching with the boys, but man, not that exciting. So
No.
So what are the things that you've learned to do to embrace those challenges now and quiet that so that you are keeping and maintaining that heart and head connection? Are there deliberate steps that you employ? What do you do?
Yeah, no. So I'm blessed, right? So I haven't had an AFib event now in 6 years, right? So I had after all of that stuff happened the following year in 2019, March of 2019, which we're in March of 2025. So it was actually March 18th is when I had my last cardiac ablation when they went in and walled off the electrical conduction that was causing the issues. So I've been free for 6 years. So it's a lot easier, right? When the symptoms aren't there anymore. But I'm still an AFib patient. So for me, I do everything every morning. I wake up with a purpose of, I'm not an act. I don't meditate or any of those things, but I do work out. I do pray. I'm a faithful person. So I do all that stuff to kind of ground myself, loaded with gratitude because, again, I experience those things and I'm like, oh boy, tomorrow might not be here. So I better enjoy what I'm doing now. And so that helps me to then reset my mind and vice versa, right? And so everything I do now is very deliberate in making sure that I'm healthy because I want to survive for my wife. I want to survive for my kids. And I always stick with the strong mindset because I think, but I'm also, but I'm also not naive, right? And I want to be very clear with this because I think, there's folks and they all well intended and well meaning. When you go through crap in your life, people will come back to you and say, it's happening for you, not to you. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't feel good. Like, not right now. I'm not ready for that, right? And so I state that because I am not perfect by any means. And so I have this, and I don't know if you ever heard the phrase, it's not mine, but I stole it, but it's embrace the suck. And I've heard that phrase and it's been used in so many different ways, but that is so true. It's like, all right, this sucks. I'm going to sit back and wallow in kind of my self-pity of like, woe is me, what's wrong with me? And there's the two choices. I could either say, all right, now I'm going to embrace what's going through and I need to make changes in my life to be stronger. Or I could go down the hole and just say, oh, woe is me, like my life is over. And guess what? Most likely my life would have been over. But I said, no, I'm here for a reason. What is my purpose? And it's a lot easier to look and reflect and say, hey, I went through all that stuff and it was being done for me. And now here's my purpose to go out and help people, right? So that's how I balance those two things is just simultaneously, but also understanding that there's days in which there's good and bad days. Like some days are just bad. And so one of the things I try to, when we talk about the carpe diem and seizing the day, is at the end of the day, if you didn't do whatever you were supposed to do that day, just forgive yourself, and this simple process of saying, yep, okay, I missed out on that. But what did I do? What did I do that moves whatever forward? And know that hopefully, God willing, if I wake up the next morning, land on my knees in gratitude that I'm alive for another day to do it all over again. And that's kind of how I line.
That's powerful. I heard you say you're blessed, and I know you feel that. I know you believe that, and you're doing things. You're deliberate and intentional about a lot of things that keep you in a blessed space, in an intentional place. I think you're really humble in saying, "Oh, I don't meditate, but I work out, I pray, I experience gratitude. Like I really do gratitude every single day." I think these are pathways to meditation, right? And
Yeah.
making sure that you feel those things. The tagline to your book is how to transform pain to purpose, and you've really done that. How do you help people? So yes, a lot of people say this is happening for you and not to you, and you're right to say that sometimes it's like right now, not a
Yeah.
good time. Don't
Right.
don't bring me. Great, take your rainbows and lollipops for a second. I'll be back to you, but I need this. When you're working with people who are learning to balance these things, and you've got three pillars that you talk about in your book: holistic work, health, faith, family life, and balance. Right. So this whole piece that you're working on. Where do you start when you're working with somebody? Because right now somebody's listening. They're an entrepreneur. They're in pain in their work. Maybe they're in pain in their health. Maybe they're struggling. What's the first thing that you do?
Yeah. Usually what I do with those folks is just I want to hear their story, right?
Mhm.
Because I know from my own experience when I wrote my book how cathartic it was for me to write my story. And I, again, just being fully transparent. I mean, there were moments in which, I wrote my book at 5 o'clock every morning. I don't, 1,500 words, 2,000 words a day. That was the mantra that I was doing. But I would sit at 5 o'clock, sometimes 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would bend over my laptop and I'd be in tears because it was suppressed, as often I grew up Irish Catholic, right? And so with being Irish Catholic, sometimes we learn to just push everything down, right? And so it came out all on the pages, and I'm like, holy cow, this is so cathartic. So when I talk to folks, I have them tell me what their story is, and then I want them to kind of start to write down a few of those things so they can get it out. And so they can start to open and realize, like, okay, yes, this is painful. I'm going through whatever X is in my life, because then I want them to understand it. And then I also want them to say, well, how do I then go back, revisit what I'm going through right now, and realign myself, to really have a restart in what those challenges are. And I don't want to be naive, obviously. I mean, if they're entrepreneurs like you and I have done and struggled, right? And I don't take lightly what I shared with you earlier too, around, your determination has to really be stronger than the concern for failure. And that's when I think success happens with entrepreneurs. And so I tell people, if you need to go back and revisit and retool what it is, do it, but stay committed to where your goal is, because it's those people that go through and resist the will to quit that will ultimately survive. You'll come out on the other end. And then this is a prime example, again, using my experience. I mean, we started our business, and I think over 18 months, we grossed $13,000. I mean, I'm trying to raise a family, and we had $13,000, right, coming in. And that was gross, right? So I don't think we paid taxes on that because it wasn't enough. The government laughed at that one. But I say that because, my wife and I then had a proverbial come to Jesus meeting, like, hey, we're going down here. Like, you need to go get a real job. And literally a week and a half later, I get a phone call right before Christmas, and somebody's like, hey, can you meet me January 3rd in New Jersey? I heard you're really good at X. Can you do this? Game on. I'm like, Lisa, we're good. This is going to take off. And it was because we just stayed persistent and committed to where we were going that we ultimately broke through. And so I say that because you need a support network. And, the whole point of that story was my wife was there. She supported me through thick and thin, good times, bad times. But then I also had support networks outside of my family that were egging me on, like, keep going, keep pushing, right? The other aspect too is my motivations were, and clearly you do a lot of reading in your life, and I do a lot too. And I recommend to individuals, if you haven't started reading, start to read other people's stories, because when you frame it out, and it's not oh, their problem is worse than mine, so I'm going to be okay. No, it's just to say there are other people that go through the same crap, maybe worse, maybe less worse than you, but they persist and they find ways to revisit. And that's where the strength comes, right? And I think your podcast the other day with a young lady on there, I think it was around success is when you learn how to resist the those challenges that are coming your way. So long-winded answer to your short question. So apologize.
No. Super awesome answer. So one of the things that I think that you really did, and you said at the beginning of it, and I want to go back to it because it's super important. You said that you suffered from anxiety as a child, right? That you were an anxious child, and hunched over your laptop as you were pulling the words out of your story, getting 1,000, 1,500 words down every single day at 5 o'clock in the morning. I say often, and there are so many things about this, but the way to get the loop out of your head is to write it down. The way to get it out of your head and into the world is to write it down. And then you can start to notice the nuance. You can notice the strength in your. I think that when it lives up here in our heads only, what ends up happening is we only see one side of it. It's not three-dimensional. It's not life. Life is much more textured than that. And the moment we take that loop and extend it down to a piece of paper or in any way, shape, or form, all of a sudden we can notice the strength, the resilience, and the patterns that are actually leading us forward as opposed to moving us back, right? Did you not see that?
Oh my gosh, without question. And to your point, it's like when people talk, like news and everything else, and all the different crap that's going on in the world nowadays. It's like, oh, you get a snippet of things, right? And I think to your point, we have those little snippets in our mind. But when you read when you put everything in context, that's where you see the strength. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. And that's exactly the way I felt. Now, I'm not a huge journaler, which my editor was funny. She's like, "Yeah, you don't journal, but you just wrote 95,000 words, so you kind of do. You just waited, 40 some years to do it." But so that's one of the key components that we're striving to do too, with my editor exactly, is to help people get those things out on paper in some way, shape, or form, because that's when they come to life. And that's when you start to see your strength. That's when you see your dots, as we were talking about with Steve Jobs and all those things. And then you start to think, I'm better than I thought I was, right? And okay, I can do this.
Something you said really quickly, and I think it's really cool that we're landing here, is that headlines, right? The headlines, the snippets that we see exist in our mind, right? The headlines, and they're always negative. They're always, not always, but they're often negative. They're, unless we're putting positive headlines in there, it's the headlines. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yep.
It's up there, and the headlines in our mind. But we have to read the story. We have to write the
Yeah.
story. We have to put it down. And I think it's such a really great idea. Embracing the suck is something really cool. Todd Palmer, the author of From Suck to Success,
Yep.
was on our podcast as well, on Paper Napkin Wisdom. He's a great friend of the show. So I totally love that. An unlimited heart fuels a life well lived. For you, that's full of purpose, right?
100%.
That's amazing.
100%. Yeah, my wife. No, sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, it's so from an entrepreneurial perspective too, I'll put this in context. So when I had my events in late 2019, it just so happenstance, then all of a sudden other companies started getting interested in the business. And by the way, my wife was my business partner eventually, so she came in. And so that's another book I need to write, about how working with your spouse can be good or bad. But but then, other companies started coming to us interested in acquiring us. And so we ultimately sold our business in 2020. And we sold the business. And I think, you were saying this in one of your other podcasts too, is like, you do these events and then you think that something great's going to happen and you're going to feel amazing when it happens. But when I sold my business, people were looking at me, they're like, "Aren't you sad? You don't even seem like overly ecstatic. Like, what is?" And to me, I just said, I knew it was going to happen. Like, because I wanted it so much to happen. Not like that was my sole goal. My sole goal was I needed to build something so beautiful that somebody else outside of my organization would say, "I want that." And then you validated what I just did. And so I felt great. I felt the validation. But when that happened, I went to work for the company that ultimately acquired us. And I was there as a part of an employment agreement for 3 years. I did my job exceptionally well. But my wife noticed, she's like, "I can tell you're not that happy." And I said, "How's that?" She's like, "Because you are a purpose-filled person and you served your purpose already. You built a great business, you sold it, and now you're building a business for somebody else." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's still my purpose." She's like, "Yeah, but no, you need more. I know you need more." And then when I told her my vision was like, "Hey, after my 3-year employment agreement, I'm going to go write a book and start a new business." And she literally, we were over eating dinner together, and I looked up from my plate and I see her and tears are running down her face. And she's like, "I'm so happy." She goes, "That is you. Go do it." Right. And so I got her blessing. So here I'm doing it again. But yeah,
Beautiful.
purpose is so important to me. And that's why I love to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to land. Jim, we do this thing this season in honor of the late John Rulin, who passed away suddenly. He was a great friend of the show. He gave us a napkin more than 10 years ago that says, "What you appreciate appreciates."
Yeah.
And we end every show this season with gratitude. Is there somebody that you'd like to shout out and give some appreciation to?
Oh, I mean, it's first and foremost, it's got to be my wife, my partner in life, in so many different ways. It's funny because she's like, "You are the big thinker and I'm the big doer." So she's an operations specialist, by the way. So she's actually still working for the organization that we were acquired by, and she's running operations for the whole place. And so if my dreams couldn't become a reality, if it wasn't for her operational expertise. So she's in so many ways just been an absolute blessing to me in my life.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Gov.
Wow. What a powerful reminder from Jim Kaveney that we don't need to run from our challenges. We can learn from them. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we uncovered in this episode of Paper Napkin Wisdom, because when you really listen, when you let the words settle in, something begins to shift. Challenges are your greatest teachers. The growth is in the lesson, not in the escape. You can transform your pain into purpose because there's strength in the scar. Embrace your mortality to activate your life. Urgency creates clarity. Presence is greater than perfection. Your power is in showing up, not showing off. And an unlimited heart fuels a life well lived. Love isn't a resource to protect, it's a fire to spread. And maybe right now, something in you is already starting to shift. Maybe you've been carrying something heavy, and now you're beginning to wonder how it might actually be helping you rise. What if this is the moment you start leading with a truly unlimited heart? Jim didn't just give us a message. He gave us a mirror, a way to see that courage isn't about having no fear. It's about choosing presence anyway. If this resonated with you, take a moment right now to write your takeaway on a napkin. Snap a photo and share it using the hashtag #PaperNapkinWisdom. Let's create a ripple that reminds others that they are not alone in their struggles or in their breakthroughs. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and share this episode. There's someone in your circle who needs this. And by sharing it, you might just become the teacher they didn't even know they needed. Because small ideas, especially the ones that can be written on a napkin, can lead to a life well lived. Until then, keep turning challenge into change and make it a great day.
Time is precious, and so are our pets. So time with our pets is extra precious. That's why we started Dutch. Dutch provides 24/7 access to licensed vets with unlimited virtual visits and follow-ups for up to 5 pets. You can message a vet at any time and schedule a video visit the same day. Our vets can even prescribe medication for many ailments, and shipping is always free. With Dutch, you'll get more time with your pets and year-round peace of mind when it comes to their vet care.